When Sylvester Stallone walked onto the stage of the Steve Harvey show, the audience expected the usual charm, some thoughtful answers, a few smiles, and perhaps a quiet nod to his latest project. But Steve had something else in mind. Behind that familiar grin and his stack of cue cards was something more deliberate, a subtle setup, an invitation disguised as conversation. He wasn't looking to provoke Stallone, but he was hoping to shake something loose, something real, something the world had never heard before. The tone shifted slowly, the laughter faded, the air thickened with quiet anticipation, and then something happened, a response no one expected, a silence that echoed louder than applause. Within minutes, one of America's most beloved talk shows became the backdrop for a moment so raw, so honest, it caught everyone off guard. Sylvester Stallone had shown up to share a few stories, but what he revealed that night would stay with people long after the cameras stopped rolling. Oh, and before we go any further, tell us, what's your most unforgettable Stallone moment? Share it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. The studio lights at WXYZ Detroit faded into a warm hush as Steve Harvey stepped onto the small stage. The air inside was quiet, respectful, no music, no hype, just the low murmur of a mature audience who'd come not for jokes or gossip, but for something real. Steve wore a black suit, a silver cross on his chest, and a calm on his face that didn't come from confidence, but from having lived enough to understand the weight of a moment before it arrived. He turned to the camera. Tonight, we're not here to talk about fame or fortune. We're here to talk about what happens in the dark, when no one's watching, and giving up feels easier than going on. His voice was soft, but steady. Because the man sitting across from me tonight, he didn't just survive that darkness. He fought his way through it and brought light for millions. Please welcome Sylvester Stallone. The audience clapped, slow and sincere. Stallone entered from stage right, wearing a dark coat, shirt open at the collar, boots well worn but polished. He looked every bit the fighter people remembered, but there was no performance in his steps. His eyes weren't hunting the crowd. They were looking inward, carrying a story not yet told. He shook Steve's hand, nodded politely, and sat down. Steve leaned in. "You good, man?" Stallone didn't answer right away. His eyes landed on Steve's chest, on the cross. He stared at it, not long, but long enough. "Steve," he said, his voice low, "I didn't come here to promote anything. I came here because I owe you something." Steve tilted his head, curious. Stallone folded his hands in his lap. "Can I tell you something I've never said in public?" The audience fell silent. Steve nodded. "I was 26 years old," Stallone began. "I was broke. Not tight on cash broke. I mean, sleeping outside in Detroit in February, broke. My shoes had holes. My coat barely closed. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I had nothing but a notebook and a pen that barely worked." He inhaled slowly, eyes far away now. "I'd come up from New York chasing a casting rumor. Someone told me a production crew was looking for gritty actors, real street types. I thought, hell, I am that guy. So I scraped together what little I had and came to Detroit. Turned out it was a lie. Some guy trying to sound important. There was no casting, no movie, just snow, concrete, and humiliation." The crowd listened so intently you could hear the set lights humming. "I remember the night it hit me," Stallone said. "Corner of 8 Mile and Lazar, behind a bowling alley. There was a stairwell that stayed dry because the back awning covered it. That was my bed. I sat on the concrete with my knees to my chest. Notebook in my jacket, pen tucked behind my ear. I could feel the cold crawling into my bones. I told myself, maybe this is it. Maybe this dream isn't for me. He paused, eyes glistening, not from tears, but from memory. I wasn't thinking about scripts or auditions that night. I was thinking about quitting life. Not killing myself. Just disappearing, stopping, letting the cold take me. I was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being told that I didn't look right, talk right, fit right. Steve sat motionless. His fingers curled softly around the silver cross. But then, something happened, Stallone continued. There was a small bar attached to the bowling alley upstairs. One of those places with sticky floors and cheap TVs above the liquor shelves. And through the basement window, I could see one of those old box TVs glowing. No sound, just movement. I recognized the format. It was a talk show. There you were, Steve Harvey, younger than now. Must have been rerun footage. You were pacing a stage, holding a mic, talking to an audience like they were your kin. And I couldn't hear a word. Not at first, but I could feel it. We call it sly or lie. The audience clapped, a few cheering in anticipation. Here's how it works, Steve said. We show a picture or story from your past, and you tell us if it's true or if the internet made it up. Stallone looked at the screen behind them, his face unreadable. The first image popped up, a grainy photo of him sitting alone on a stone bench at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale. His sunglasses barely hid the weariness in his eyes. In the background, the headstone of his son Sage was just visible. The caption on screen read, "Real or real?" Steve looked at the image, then at Stallone. Now this looks like a deleted scene from Creed, but the team tells me it's real. Is it? A few nervous chuckles stirred in the audience. Stallone didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen. The silence stretched just a beat too long. Then softly, he said, "It's real." Steve shifted in his seat. "Okay, that's deep, man. Look, we didn't mean to touch a nerve." Stallone turned to him. "It's not about nerves. It's about context." Steve blinked. Okay, I hear you. We're just trying to give people a look behind the curtain, you know?" He flipped the next card. A new photo appeared. Stallone and his brother Frank outside a Malibu restaurant, mid-argument. This one, true or just a spicy tabloid moment? Again, the crowd chuckled. Stallone didn't move. "You know," he said slowly, "when you've buried your child and watched your marriage unravel in the same year, you don't really care what strangers think happened in a parking lot." The temperature in the room dropped. Steve adjusted his collar. "I mean no harm, man. This show's about celebration. We just trying to honor you." "Then don't turn my grief into a punchline," Stallone replied, his voice still calm, but firmer now. "Because that's not honor. That's entertainment pretending to be empathy." The audience was no longer laughing. A woman in the third row wiped under her glasses. Someone behind her whispered, "Wow." Steve tried to recover. "Okay, let's talk legacy again. What keeps you going, man? You've done it all. You could be sitting on a yacht in the Caribbean, but here you are, digging into pain like it's your job." Stallone looked him in the eye. "Because I still don't know how to say goodbye properly. And maybe if I talk about it enough, I won't have to." Steve opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at the cards in his hand, then tossed them gently onto the table. "Man, you're making it real hard to joke right now." Stallone leaned back. Maybe not everything needs to be a joke. From backstage, a floor manager leaned toward the director. "We're losing the tempo. she said. "He's pulling us into something deeper." But out front the crowd was rapt. No one fidgeted. No one scrolled their phones. They were listening, not for drama, but for truth. Steve exhaled, slow. "Let me ask you this," he said. "Do you think we laugh to keep from crying?" Stallone didn't hesitate. "No, I think we laugh because we're afraid of silence. And sometimes silence is the only thing that's honest." The lights hummed overhead. The moment didn't explode. It just settled, like snow falling on asphalt. Cold, quiet, undeniable. And the show, though still rolling, was no longer the same. The silence in the studio lingered longer than anyone expected. Steve Harvey shifted slightly in his chair, tapping the edge of his cue cards with his thumb, though they were now resting uselessly on the table beside him. Stallone sat across from him like a statue, calm, composed, but radiating something powerful beneath the surface, the kind of presence that didn't need volume to command attention. The audience had stopped clapping. There were no chuckles, no whispers, just breathing and watching. Steve tried to recenter the energy, forcing a casual tone into his voice. All right, he said. "Let's not get too deep in the weeds. We got a lot of people tuning in for a good time tonight." Stallone's gaze didn't waver. "And some came for something real," he replied, voice steady. Steve raised his eyebrows. "I ain't saying this ain't real, man. I just know what happens when shows get too heavy. People tune out. Maybe we need to stop worrying so much about who tunes out," Stallone said, "and start worrying about who's left alone when the lights go off." That line hit the room like a weight. In the second row, an older black man in a brown fedora lowered his head, eyes closed. Folks who are sitting in silence, wondering if the world would even notice if they disappeared. And to them, I want to say what you said to me, Steve. If you're still breathing, God's not done with you. A ripple of quiet emotion spread through the room. One woman held her hand to her mouth. A man in the third row had lowered his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. "I got asked once," Stallone said, "if I believed in destiny. I said no. I believe in decisions. Destiny is a beautiful word, but it never paid my rent. It never put food on my table. What changed my life wasn't fate. It was a decision to keep going, to write one more line, to walk 4 more blocks through the snow, to ask for work even when it was humiliating. And that decision, it came because I heard you say it was still worth trying." Steve wiped his face now, slowly, as if doing so felt like letting go of something he'd been carrying too long. "You know," he said quietly, "people think I started telling those stories to inspire others. But the truth is, I was trying to inspire myself. I'd talk to that crowd like I was talking to God, like I was asking him to remind me why I hadn't quit yet. I never imagined someone like you would be out there hearing me." "That's the point," Stallone said. "You never know who's listening, who's hanging by a thread, who just needs to hear one sentence to keep going." His voice firmed slightly. Not louder, just clearer. "And that's why I came here tonight. Not because I need anything. Not because I wanted a headline. I came because I owed the truth. I owed it to that kid, still sleeping behind stairwells. I owed it to the version of you who didn't know if those late nights and lonely drives were doing any good. I came to say that sometimes the smallest seed you plant grows in soil you never see, and it changes everything." Steve leaned back now, slowly, like a weight had lifted, but also left him hollow for a moment. "You're right," he said. "I was just trying to survive out loud. I didn't realize I was planting seeds. Stallone nodded. You were, and not just for me. I met a young actor once in New Orleans. He was hungry, sleeping in his car. Said he was thinking about giving up. I sat with him for an hour, told him your story, told him mine. That kid's on television now, and every time I see his face, I think that seed kept growing. The room breathed in again, not loud, not theatrical, just full. People were living through this moment like a sermon, not one that scolded, but one that healed. I have this belief, Stallone said, that the people who survive the deepest pain don't do it to become heroes. They do it to become messengers, carriers of something real, something you can't fake. Steve, you've been carrying that message for decades. Through every heartbreak, every betrayal, every laugh that covered a scar. Steve let out a breath that sounded more like a release than a response. And you, he whispered, you turned pain into poetry. That notebook you had in your coat, that wasn't just a script. That was your lifeline. And now, it's our legacy. For a long while, neither man spoke. They just sat there, in the kind of silence that only comes from two people who understand what it means to crawl out of despair and into light. The audience didn't clap. They didn't need to. The atmosphere was beyond performance now. It was communion. So now what? Steve finally asked. Now that we've said what we didn't know we were carrying? Stallone smiled gently. Now, we remind the world that the fight's not over. Not for them, not for us. We've still got breath. So God's still not done. A quiet amen rolled somewhere from the crowd. And just like that, two men sat under the soft stage lights of a Detroit studio, wrapped in shared struggle, silent grace, and the quiet truth that what saves a man is rarely dramatic. It's usually just one sentence, spoken at the right time, by someone who didn't even know they were being heard. The room stayed still, the kind of stillness not even a commercial break could interrupt. Steve Harvey and Sylvester Stallone sat shoulder to shoulder under the soft studio lights in Detroit, not as a host and guest, but as two men who had, in their own ways, survived the fire and returned carrying something for others. Steve leaned forward a little, hands resting on his knees, looking out at the quiet crowd. You know what gets me? He said, voice hoarse but steady. The number of times I thought nobody heard me. All those nights talking to a cheap hotel ceiling, trying to pray but only managing to whisper. All those years wondering if I was just making noise. But tonight, I'm sitting across from a man who was ready to quit, ready to vanish, and something I said reached through the snow and found him. That humbles me more than anything money or TV ever gave me. Stallone nodded, hands folded, eyes low, heart wide open. You gave people permission to hurt without quitting. That matters more than you know. Steve looked up slowly. So what do we do now? What do we tell the people watching this? The ones who think it's too late for them? Stallone's answer came without hesitation. We tell them the truth. That hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just a sentence, a look, a stranger's story. And we tell them this. You are not too old. You are not too broken. And you are not too late. He turned to Steve. I was 30 before anyone gave me a role. I was 31 before someone believed in my writing. I was 32 and nearly frozen behind a bowling alley. If that night had ended differently, there'd be no Rocky, no Rambo, no career, just a forgotten dream in the snow. But instead, I heard your voice, and it told me to get up one more time. Steve took a breath. Eyes misted again. It's not just about getting up, though. It's about what we do once we're standing. It's about turning back around and helping the next one. Stallone smiled, slow and knowing. That's why I came here, to turn around. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Aged, creased at the corners, edges worn like a map carried too long. He unfolded it with care, smoothing it gently. I wrote this in 1976, he said, the morning after I watched your show through that bar window. I'd just rewritten the ending to Rocky. But I still didn't believe in myself, so I wrote a letter, to no one in particular. I never sent it, but I want to read it now. The audience held their breath. Steve closed his eyes. Stallone began to read. To the man who spoke when I needed it most. You don't know me. You don't know I'm hungry. You don't know I haven't slept. You don't know I'm about to give up. But you're on my TV tonight, talking like you see me. And for some reason, I believe you. I don't have much, but I have a story. I think it matters. You made me think it matters. So I'm going to try again tomorrow. Not because I believe in myself, but because, for 5 minutes, I believed in you. He looked up. I never knew who I was writing to, until now. Steve swallowed hard. You wrote that before you became who you are now. I wrote that, Stallone said, before I became anything. The weight of that line filled the air. There was no music, no applause, just hearts beating with the sudden understanding that every person watching might still be standing at the edge of their own miracle, not even realizing they're one sentence away. What I want people to know, Stallone continued, is that greatness isn't about talent. It's about perseverance. It's about choosing not to quit even when nobody claps for you, even when nobody sees you, even when you're talking to a wall or a stairwell or a camera lens and you think no one hears you. He paused, then leaned in. Some of the greatest things in life come after the moment you almost gave up. That's the test, not the fame, not the money. The test is in the silence. Steve leaned forward. That's where the voice matters most. The voice inside, or the voice on a screen, or from a stranger, or from God. Stallone's jaw tightened. You were my voice that night. So now I want to be someone else's. That's why I'm here. That's the only reason I agreed to sit in this chair. Because somewhere out there, there's someone sitting in their own version of that stairwell, broke, cold, scared. And I want them to know I see them, that we see them. And if they're still breathing, their fight's not done. Steve looked out into the crowd. Many were crying now, but not from sadness, from relief, from being seen, from remembering the time they too almost gave up and didn't. You said it best, Sly, he whispered. Sometimes the smallest seed grows in soil we never see. You planted something tonight, not just in me, but in them. Stallone gave a single nod. It's not just our story. It belongs to them now. The audience stood, not because they were told to, but because something in them refused to stay seated. They clapped quietly at first, then louder. Not a standing ovation of excitement, but of reverence, gratitude. Steve stood slowly and reached out his hand. Stallone took it. They didn't shake. They just held it, both men looking out at the crowd, then at each other. Steve's voice came soft. Would you pray with me? Stallone nodded. I'd be honored. They bowed their heads. Steve led. Lord, thank you for pain that didn't destroy us, but refined us. Thank you for stories that don't end in stairwells. And thank you for the people who speak light, even when they don't know they're being heard. Use us, Father. Use what hurt us to heal someone else. Amen. Amen, Stallone whispered. And in that small studio in Detroit, surrounded by tears, lights, and silence, two men stood, not as stars, not as heroes, but as messengers. One had once saved the other without knowing it, and together they passed the torch to whoever needed it next, because sometimes the most powerful stories don't begin with applause. They begin in the cold, in the dark, with a broken pen and a reason to try again tomorrow.